Testing, 1, 2. It is the last of the 6 classes for learning the Aleph Bet. This one is in some ways more satisfying and in some ways more intimidating because this is our text. That's intimidating, but it's because you can read every single letter. That is the Decalogue from Exodus. I call it Decalogue. I don't like to call it the 10 Commandments. We've talked about that, right? Okay, good. I had somebody come to me the other day. I was at a funeral, I want to say, or maybe not even, and somebody who knew me. We good? Okay. I'm teaching. And he said that he remembered, maybe it was a wedding, but he said he remembered that I taught about the General Electric lights never dim. Did I teach you that? General Electric lights never dim. That's how you know the 5 books of the Torah. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. General Electric lights never dim. And he came up to me, and it was like years since the last time he'd come to one event ever, and he had heard me say that, and he comes up to me and says, guess what? I remember. I think it was a wedding. Anyway, we're here for the last few letters of the Aleph Bet. So we start off with, and I lost my yod, I have to use my finger. We start off with singing the song. Aleph Bet Vet, Aleph Bet Vet, Gimel Dalet Hey, Gimel Dalet Hey, Vav Zayin Chet Tet, Vav Zayin Chet Tet, Yud Kaf Chaf, Yud Kaf Chaf, Lamed Mehem Nun, Lamed Mehem Nun, Samech Ayin Pe Fe, Samech Ayin Pe Fe, Tzadi Kuf Resh, Tzadi Kuf Resh, Shin, Sin, Tav Ba Ba Da Ba Dam, Shin, Sin, Tav Ba Ba Da Ba Dam. I should let you know that you may find some people who say the names of these letters differently than I do. I think that part of it is that modern Hebrew is a very new language. Many people learned it from the old countries, and they had other pronunciations that they learned then. So other than the fact that there's an Ashkenazic pronunciation and a Sephardic pronunciation, Ashkenazic, the word literally means German, but it comes from Eastern Europe, and you will hear people saying this letter when it doesn't have a dagesh as a s, and you'll hear it as a t when it does have a dagesh. And so the name of this letter is bet, but they would say base, and they would say aleph, base, vase. And you'll hear them say it that way. Sometimes if you're watching, especially now with YouTube, if you're watching certain Orthodox, Hasidic especially, the Hasidim all come from Eastern European backgrounds, so they're going to have a Hasidic, an Ashkenazic pronunciation that'll be influenced by wherever the culture is from. But they'll say some of these letters differently than the way I pronounce them. Yud is supposed to be a hand, which is a yad, so you'll hear some people pronounce it as yad. I had never heard it that way until recently. Or tzadi. I think some people, the word tzadi the name sounds like tzaddik, which is a righteous person, and in the Ashkenazic it would be pronounced tzaddik instead of tzaddik. One of the things you'll notice about Ashkenazic pronunciation is that the accent is usually shifted towards the front of the word, and in modern Sephardic Israeli pronunciation, the Israeli pronunciation is fairly Sephardic, which literally means Spanish, by the way, because it came from Sfarad, is Spain, and it's influenced by that. But a lot of people will pronounce that tzaddik with a k at the end, but I don't think that's what it's called. But you'll sometimes hear some of these pronounced slightly differently. That's the way I learned it. It's worked for me for decades now, and I'm going to stick to that. You'll also find that some people use slightly different pronunciations of these, and you'll find transliterations of them differently. So the Ashkenazic pronunciation is that whenever you see this, it will always be O, always. The Sephardic pronunciation is that it is mostly A and sometimes O, only when it's acting like a short vowel. We haven't talked about long and short vowels, and I don't know that we will today. We've got a lot of letters to learn today. We may have to wait for whatever our next class is. But the Ashkenazic pronunciation, that would always be O, and that's A, and that's E, but this is I, like a short I. And so you'll sometimes see transliterations like that. This one is which is what we say it is. And in modern Israel, it's the official pronunciation to make that as well. I'm giving you the modern Israeli pronunciations on all of these. So they have both of them as E. That's the official pronunciation. And both of these as But when I learned it, that was an and this is an A always. And that's an So there was a more obvious distinction between the long and short vowels, even though when I was taught it, both of these were in fact, it was years before anyone confided that sometimes it's an O or Y. It sounds like O. This is always an U and this is always an U. These, when it's going over, are always O, and that one is always going to be O. The moving shva and the resting shva. We have what's called the composite vowels, the chataf patach is always and chataf segel is always Chataf kamatz is always O, because it's always taking the short vowel version of it. And then you've got these, the oi. That's a very Ashkenazic pronunciation of something. My phone refuses to believe me when I write O-Y. Every single time it changes it to it. Doesn't matter how many times. It refuses to learn that one for me. I, and this is A. So we're going to have these as always being and that's how you make it A. Can you see any of these, Tim? What I'm pointing at? You can't hear me. Let me show you what I'm doing here. So I'm going to take an aleph to represent a silent consonant, but it represents any consonant. So I'm going to take that, and I'm going to show you that this, the way we do it, is and the only way we can make it A is if you add a yud to it. So it's A, or as I showed you, it's A plus E. And I think they gave me the wrong ones today. There's one drawer with dying ones and one drawer with brand new ones that I bought. A plus E is A. In a universal phonetic method, that's A, that's E, that's E, that's O, that's U. If you ever took Spanish or Italian or French, you know that that's how they will pronounce it, and it's consistent. In English, it is crazy. I mean, what could that sound like? It could be an an A. It could be all kinds of things. But in a universal phonetic spelling, that's E, O, U. So if I do this, that's plus E, and that becomes what most people think of as A. Is A. It's the only way to make it. You can't make it separately. So we've talked about the diphthongs before, but I just wanted to point out that sometimes you'll hear people referring to the letters and to the vowels in a slightly different way, and that's what's happening as you get there. All right, so we have, I like this lesson because there are specific letters that we haven't learned yet. I don't know if you can see the list over there. I'll write them all down quickly because I think it's significant that none of these letters are in the first day of creation story. In fact, some of the letters are not in the whole creation story at all. And I would lie if I would tell you that I remember what all of those are. I can tell you something about them. They're all sibilants, but all right, so here, that's, should be curved or blocky, whatever it is, but we've already learned the kaf when you take the palm of your hand and you put a cough drop. Because if you don't put a cough drop, it sounds like Is that scary? Probably was really scary online. I'm going to make it more curved than that because it's a curve without the cough drop, so you're going and it comes from the back of your throat. We have two chaching sounds. That's this one, chaf, but there's also the chet, which I call like the wet H. And if you are inclined to do so, they sound different. This is a and this is a so one of them is more like fogging up your glasses, the wet H, and this one's more like clearing your throat. In a lot of transliterations in America, you will see the ch, this one or this one, and it will be written as this. But that's confusing, if you ask me. That looks like a ch. But you'll see, like Hanukkah is often spelled with a ch, or Baruch Atah the beginning of blessings, you'll see it like that. And you always know when someone gets up to do a blessing that they're reading from transliteration, because they'll say things like, if their background is more French, they'll say Baruch instead of Baruch, or if it's, or they don't know what they're doing and they'll Baruch. But when I studied it, along with the I and the A and all of those things, both of these were the same ch. I guess most of the Ashkenazic pronunciations, the Germanic kinds of languages have one kind of ch. They don't have two kinds of chs. I remember telling someone the joke about something about making the van go, or there was a joke about I don't have enough Monet, or to buy Degas to make the van go. And so I was speaking to someone who was living in Austria, who was a British guy who was living in Austria, but apparently they would say both of these as chs. So they would say van Gogh, and that just totally messed up the joke. But it's the same ch, and it's still a ch. So anyway, ways of transliterating. So we now have the ch. That's one of the letters that we need to know. You now see the ch. We have the ch and the k, the ch, and there's a final ch version. We've learned all of those now that we've learned this one. We learned this consonant long ago. Oh, goodness gracious, you can't see these. We learned these long ago. Let's see if I can get any one of them to, right, there you go. The final tzadi, it goes below the line, and it reminded you of a guy making a pizza. So it's a tz. This one, the next one that we have to learn, I like to call this one the twisted pretzel. In fact, it's one of my favorite, one of the oldest show me videos, because somehow I can make like a pretzel out of this. I don't know, it looks like a pretzel somehow. But it's a twisted pretzel, and it sounds like tss. This is what it looks like at the end of a word, but this is what it looks like anywhere else in a word. I like to see almost all of the final ones as the bottom just dropping down to make the letter. So if this is what it looks like on the final, like that, if I take that and then I take this line and I just bring it down, that's how you get the final. So you can see the top of it at least stays consistent. So we now have a ch and a tz. And along with the tz, the next 3 letters that we learn are sibilants, which means that we're trying to get air to come through our teeth. S. So the first one is going to be this, and I know you know this one, because at the end of the song, we say shin, sin, tav, ba ba da ba dam. So what happens here is that if you make what looks like the teeth, remember we did this, that you take your fingers and put it in front of your mouth and you kind of make a shin, which is a tooth, but you're making that and you're getting air to come out of it. One way of getting air to come out of it is shh, and the other way of getting air to come out of it is s. So there are a couple of ways of remembering which one is which. Most of the time, the vast majority of time, it's a shin and not a sin. But there's a few ways of learning. The way that I learned it is a little bit embarrassing because it kind of doesn't make sense, but it worked for me. The teacher said, sun, shine. So this side is a s and this side is a sh. But that's terrible. That's trying to make your brain think in Hebrew and in English at the same time. That's really not good. I mean, to some extent, that's what I'm doing with all my mnemonic devices. If I say bar on the bottom, basic goes beyond ball in the belly, that's all English words with a mnemonic. But the mnemonic is supposed to get you to think, but. So this one, the only way I could get there is if I remember that the sun is on this side and the shine is on that side. So here's a newer version that works. That is, if you remember that she is always right, and it's no sin to be a lefty. Because in many cultures, the sin means left. Like sinister, in Italian, sinistra is left. So that when it's on the left, it's no sin to be a lefty, and then there's a sh on the right, that she is always right. Come on, that helps, right? So we've got a ts, which is a sibilant, and a s, which is a sibilant, and then we've got another, let's see what I got here. Please work. This one is a circular samech. It's a circular samech. You may notice that it looks a little bit suspiciously like a final mem. I'm going to take you over to here where you can see a final mem and you can see a circular samech. But you'll notice that there really is either a circle or some fonts, it'll be like a slice on that side, but the mem is always marshmallowy and always more square. And the mem is always only at the end of a word. So if you see it anywhere else in the word, if you're doubting yourself about whether it's a samech or a final mem, if it's anywhere else in the word other than the last letter position, you know it's got to be a samech. So if you're not convinced, think about it logically and know that it's a circular samech. Although lately, we've decided that it looks a lot like a smart car, especially like if you put this vowel down on it. You know those little smarts? They're itsy bitsy. So put this vowel and poof, you have a little smart car.
So is it the same sound as?
It's like the same way that we had the tet and the tav, where the tav is a spread out kind of ta, and this is a dainty ta. So the samech is the more dainty of the s and s. I don't know that you'd ever hear the difference, but people will say the difference. It existed before, but the samech is the dainty one, and the sin is the not so dainty one. It's a sin. It has nothing to do with being a sin, that name. You know, it's just the sh and the sa, and that's what it is. So, all right, so we've got those. And then the next one is another sibilant. The next one is, I'm running out of cool colors to change it to. I'm going to make it this one again. This one I like to call, I'm going to start all over because that's not good. You go that way. This one I like to call a zig, zag, zayin. When we're making our box again to show how big a letter is, so far all of these fill up the whole box, but the zig, zag, zayin only takes up half a box. It's the same width as, let's say, a vav. And the way you can tell that it's not a vav is that it zigs and it zags. And it's a zigzag zayin. Half a box. We're online. Maybe I shouldn't tell you some of these little tidbits about the Zions, but I may have to, because some of you may go to Israel. So the Zion, the word Zion comes from the word for like a dagger or the bayonet of a gun, of a rifle, because it's pointy and sharp and whatever, and if you make it with the serif, it goes like this, it's even more so, and then this looks like that. But in colloquial Hebrew, it means a penis. That the guys walk around saying, oh, I've got a Zion Gadol, I've got a big Zion. And the girls say, keep it to yourself, dude. But just letting you know, be careful how you throw that letter around in Hebrew. I'm just going to say that. All right. So I just wanted to point out that these four letters, the tzadi, the sin, the samech, the zayin, are all sibilants. The zayin is a voiced sibilant, so it's just making sound come out of it. I think it's cool that none of those are in the creation story. We do have a shin, we have a final tzadi, which we're going to see only this one, but we don't have all of those sibilants. All of them are not in that part of the creation story. And most of them are not in the creation story at all. So I think that's kind of cool. We do have a ch only in the final shape from day one, and the ch comes up in other places in the other days of the week, but some of those sibilants don't ever come up at all in the creation story. Now, we have only 2 more letters to go, and one of them you already know. And I'm going to do practice with you after the fact. I just thought it was cool to throw them together. In researching the best way to teach letters, I think I've told you before, it is usually bad if I taught you all the letters that look alike but sound different. That would be bad. You would probably always mishmash them in your brain. But if I teach you a whole bunch of letters that all sound alike, that sound similar, it's going to be a lot easier to retain that sound in your mind. And especially now that we pointed out that none of those sounds were in the creation, the first day story. That's kind of cool. So this, I'm going to skip one if you're following in a book. I'm going to skip one and take you to the last letter. And that is a final letter, goes below the line, and it's a final fe. You see the fang, the featureless face, the fang, and the bottom drops down below the line. That's a f. That's the very last letter that we have to learn. It's the last one that comes up in our whole thing. So f, final f. And the one that's missing in there is one that you haven't seen a whole bunch, but this one is a fun one. This one is, I'm going to come up with a color that's good. Let's see if this blue is there. So this is a narrow one again. That looks like a vav. A nun looks like this, but this one has a gap at the bottom. It's a gap at the bottom, gimel. And I'm going to show you my artistic prowess here, because this word comes from gamal, which means, thank you, camel. It means camel. It looks a little like a camel. The neck that spits, watch out from that end, watch out for this end, watch out for the ends. But a gimel, remember that originally all of these letters were pictographs first. So we talk about it with some of the body parts were obvious, but gimel is gamal. And so we've got the gap at the bottom, gimel. Notice the gap, that's important. Mind the gap, as they say, if you were in England, but most of us haven't been to England to know what to mind the gap means. But just pointing out, that's all of the letters. So now I want to practice all of the letters, make sure we know what they are, and going to take them in order. These are the practice words that we had, and I don't think that you're going to be able to see them big enough, so I'm going to write them here again. So the first word is v'chol, with the O dot and the lamed. V'chol means all of or every. This is one of the words that's actually in the text, in the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. It's going to say v'chol. This is a good word. What's that say? With the one dot underneath it is li. And then if I do this, that's the end of the syllable. It's leave, because it's a vet, right? Leave. And then we have a rounded resh with an ah, livra. And then we have livracha, livracha. So this word, baracha means blessing. Bracha. Or as they say, the Ashkenazic pronunciation, they always say brucha. It sounds like a Spanish witch. Bruja is a Spanish witch. Bracha, a bracha is a blessing. And livracha means to or for a blessing. So you might say, may someone's memory be livracha, zichrono livracha. May your memory be for a blessing is what you say instead of rest in peace. Usually you'll say, if you find out someone died, you say, may their memory be livracha. Or you shall be livracha velo leklala. You should be for a blessing and not a curse. So the prefix added before it means that we take the dot out, but you'll notice that baracha and livracha, it's the same exact word. It just has to do with where this letter is in the word, whether it's going to have a ba or a va. The same thing is true with the cha, that's the same exact letter as a ka. And there may be times when you're going to see that root, the bet, resh, chaf root, that means blessing or praise. You're going to see it sometimes with a ba, and sometimes with a va, and sometimes with a ka, and sometimes with a cha. And then the last one that we're supposed to practice for the chaf is this one, which is in the text. It starts with a missile mountain mem with a moving shva, m, la. And this one has an aleph in the middle, which is not going to be sounded at all. It officially becomes part of the vowel. It doesn't even have a vowel under it, but it's how you spell this word. And the word is milacha, milacha. Milacha means work. It's the kind of work that God forbids us to do on Shabbat. It says kol milacha, we're not supposed to do. So then it's our obligation to figure out, what does milacha mean? What is it that God's telling us not to do? What's work? And so then you realize, well, you know what? There's two kinds of words for work, at least two. One is milacha and one is avodah. Da. And why did God use this word for work? And what does it mean? And so one way of finding out, because the commandment says, where are we here? They're not there, let's see. It says, 6 days shall you work, ta'avod, and it uses that root. 6 days shall you work, v'asita kol malachtecha, and you shall do all of your malacha. And on the seventh day, Shabbat l'Adonai, it is a Sabbath, a Shabbat for God, Adonai Elohecha. You can't do kol melacha. You can't do melacha. So it uses both. In this case, it's using melacha. And so how do we know what melacha means? One way is there any place in the Torah where it says, and this is the malacha that has to do with something? And there is. So if we're talking about building the tabernacle, for example, it says this is the malacha that goes into building the tabernacle. We say, oh, I know what malacha is. It's going to give me a definition because it's going to give me a list. It has to do with sewing and weaving and hammering, and then it'll say, and these are other things that are malacha. So that's a good way of knowing. So there's a list of all of these things that you shouldn't do on Shabbat because it defines what malacha is. But it also says, why are you not supposed to work on Shabbat? Because God rested on Shabbat. Well, what kind of malacha was God doing? God was creating things that didn't exist before. Can I do that? No. I can do magic tricks, but that's not the same thing. So how do I come up with things that will make me fulfill a commandment about not creating things on the seventh day? And so one example that I like to use is writing. If I have a blank piece of paper and I write something down, then I'm creating something that wasn't there. So I try never to write on Shabbat. Or making a fire. It's not just in the days when you had to work a lot to make a fire. You're also creating something that wasn't there. There was no fire. Now there's a fire. That's not good. And so then you get interpretations about, well, maybe it has to do with modifying the energy thing about something. And so cooking is not allowed and other things. And so you get to interpret, and I mean that literally. Whoops, I'm going to put that back over here. You get to interpret what malacha is. And the sages of old have come up with interpretations, and you have to figure out if that still works in the modern world. For example, I will not light a fire on Shabbat, but I turn the lights on and off. And I drive a car because I don't think of turning the key as starting a fire. I'm glad for that. I don't think of turning the light on and off as starting a fire. But if you're saying, well, I'm trying to imagine what God meant for me to do, did God mean for me not to have light when it gets dark? Well, then maybe I shouldn't be doing the electricity at all. So you got to work that out. Anyway, that was our first letter. The second letter is the tzadi, and these are the words that we had for tzadi, and some words for practicing. What's that? Tsa. Tzafon. Tzafon. Tzafon is north. Tzafon is north. And then we have Tir. Tzach. Tirtzach is you will murder. Obviously, the commandment is not that you will murder. Obviously, the commandment is that you will not murder. So how do they say it? In the commandment it says, lo, and then this comes out, lo tirtzach, you shall not murder. No, you will murder. No, you will murder is the same thing as you will not murder. Which brings me to another thing. There's commandments are divvied into a few different categories. There's different ways of divvying up the commandments. One is positive and negative. The negative commandments are the thou shalt nots. And the positive commandments are the thou shalt. So it may say thou shalt keep or remember Shabbat, but thou shalt not murder. And remember, it's murder. It's not about killing. Killing is sometimes very important, I'm sad to say, but it's true, depending on what it is that's attacking you. Like a mosquito, just saying. But that's not the same thing as murdering. And the murdering is what's being forbidden. And then Here's another one. This is a really important one. This is a m with an I, mi, and a tzadi, meets, with a shva, so that's your first syllable. This letter is kind of tricky here. Look what happens here. So I have meets, and then I have this, which my knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, that must be an O, because I have Mr. Vav up at bat, and there's an O going over. But it can't be an O by itself, because this consonant has a vowel. When you're reading, you're doing consonant, vowel, so next has to be a consonant. So if this were a consonant, then it would be a Vav with an O dot, so it's mitzvo. But it took a little working to get there. That's mitzvo. It wasn't so very obvious. And the word we have is mitzvotai. Mitzvotai. So mitzvah is a commandment. Mitzvah is a commandment. Mitzvot, the a to ot, means you're going from singular to the plural. Ot is a plural ending. Mitzvot means commandments. Mitzvotai, when you add that I, it means my. It means my plural something. So mitzvotai means my commandments. Mitzvotai. And those are our tzadi words. I should ask if you have any questions or anything on these words before I erase everything. The next one we're going to do is the sin. And the sin, this one is an ayin with an a, and the sin with an a and a hey. Asa. Asa means made or did. He made or he did. This is one that's directly in the text. Asa. It's a word that you get, it's a fairly common word to make or do something. Asa. And then this is actually related. Ve means and. You've already seen that. O. Se. Oh wait, you don't have that kind of O. Never mind. Let's fix this again. All right, so this one comes out looking kind of funky. If I squish that together, how do you know that that's not a shin dot? Well, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. End of word. You see it? Ve, o, se. Ve means and. O, se, you may notice, is the same exact three letters as this word. Asa is the verb. It's the he did it vowel pattern. O, se is the continuing action, what in modern Hebrew we would call present tense, but there is no present tense in biblical Hebrew. It's a continuing action. So it's something like, it would be translated as, and he is making, or and he is doing, or and he is a maker, or and he is a doer. And I know that it's masculine singular because it ends in e, that's the masculine form, as opposed to a, which would be a feminine form in this form. That just means past tense. It's not the same a. But anyway, ve'osa means and he makes or and he does. We'll leave it like that. And this is the same exact root. And the word is ve, which means and again. And then we have and then we have si ta, which is and you will make or and you will do. Ve'asita. The ta ending has to do with you, ata, masculine singular. Va means and. You'll notice that all of these have ayin sin hey, ayin sin hey, ayin sin not hey, because in this past tense form of the verb, the regular thing to do is for a hey to turn into a yud. We'll talk about that one day when you're older. So those are three different forms of the verb. No, well, let me show you. Good question. Someone's asked and we've got it here actually. That's one of our core sounds. So if I have the one dot, if the one dot is E with the yud E, but if it were the two dots, then it would be A. Two dots with the yud. Got it? Thanks for asking, because that's what happens. Once you actually see it in action, things kick in different ways, and I'm glad that you saw it that way. All right, so those are those little words and those letters. We've got some more to practice. This one, circular samich with an featureless face with fangs. So I have two es together. Even though it's not the same I have two es together, so it's a segolate, which means that the accent's going to be on the second one. And the rounded resh, that word is sefer. So I told you, when I was young, I would have pronounced that sefer. So there's this adorable story. At camp, they try to teach you the words. They have this thing that they call ivrit daber ivrit. Hebrew person speak Hebrew. And so they would act out things, and they would use mnemonic devices, kind of making it sound like an English word and a Hebrew word will sound alike. So there was one that they talked about where they're in a dining hall. There are 100 people, hundreds of people in there. You're not supposed to run around in the dining hall for obvious reasons. And yet, one day, one guy runs in, and they see that he's being chased by someone else. And this way, it gets everybody's attention, and they're pushing, and they're coming around, and they're zigging and zagging. And then finally, the guy being chased stands up next to a guy who's standing and reading a book. And he said, I'm going to stand here because it's sefer by the book. Because sefer means book. So when you do it that way, even if you're kind of sort of thinking in Hebrew and English at the same time, you remember it. Or, well, we'll get to it in a minute. So sefer. The root for sefer, samech, pei, resh, also can be a sofer. Remember we had the scribe come a couple months ago. A scribe is a sofer. It could also be an author is a sofer. Sifrut is literature. But then there are other meanings for samech, pei, resh that are tangentially related. So misaper means to tell a story. But sofer can also mean to count. So there's a root that means something about stories and something about counting. And we do that in English. We'll say, I recounted a tale. I don't know why we connect those two, but we do. But so misaper also can mean to cut hair. And that takes a longer stretch to try to make them connect. So there was a video we used to use that talked about this Israeli guy in the 70s, American guy who was visiting Israel, and he had this giant, we called them Jufro or Isro, and he had this giant head of hair. And he's in Israel, and he's trying to learn how to speak in Hebrew. And the barber has these really great stories, and he's talking. And the guy said, I want a little bit from here and a little bit from here, just a little bit. So the guy is talking and saying, and I met this guy, and the same chair you're sitting in was the president. Next thing you know, half of it is like, and the other half is like, and he says, yeah, you misaper, which means you cut hair, but you misaper sipurim, stories. You tell stories, you're forgetting about the hair. Anyway, so sefer, the other words that I'd already told you about, this one is a sofer, which is a scribe or an author. And a word that's totally unrelated to that root is this one. Starts with a chet. That's our first chet for today, other than when I was describing. This is a segolate, chesed. There's a dingle-dangle doohickey, chesed. Chesed means something like loving kindness. It's a really short word in Hebrew that means a really big concept in Hebrew, if you translate it into English. Chesed is loving kindness. It's one of the most wonderful things that you can do when you're doing something nice for someone else. You're just doing it out of a loving kindness. It's even better than just kindness. It's a beautiful thing. Chesed. And actually, we talked before about there are a certain Orthodox group called the Hasidim, and it comes from that word chesed because they were founded on a principle of loving kindness, that was the primary foundational part about Judaism, according to the founder of, he started this movement, the Baal Shem Tov they call him, which means the master of the good name. In those days, everybody was, in order to study, you needed to be wealthy. And the ones who studied knew all of these details about what to do when and what not to do, and can you do this and that. And the poorer people felt kind of left behind. And the richer people, the ones who were educated, would kind of look down on them. And he said, you don't need that. Let's do this. And he would take them into the forest. And instead of knowing every detail of every prayer, he would just sing these songs to them, with them. Bum, biddy, bum, 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 bum. And they had a similar, maybe even a better spiritual experience by singing and not necessarily knowing all of the picky details, but their hearts were in it. And so they called themselves eventually the Hasidim, the Hasidim, so that, because they were founded more on acts of loving kindness than they were on the details and the picky stuff. So, but chesed is a good word to know. The next letter was the zigzag zayin. So we have this word. What does this mean? Zeh means this. See, it's a masculine this. And this word, zo, with an aleph with nothing with it, zot, that's a feminine this. So if I want to ask you what something is, I might say, ma zeh. Ma zeh. Zeh eight, it's a pen. Ma zeh. Zeh luach, it's a blackboard, it's a whiteboard, it's a board. So if you want to ask about things, you'll usually say zeh. And if you don't know what it is, more often than not, you'll use the zeh and not the zot. You could use either one. If you wanted to say, who is this? And I know that it's male or female, then I could say mi zeh or mi zot. I could know and use the appropriate one. But zeh and zot mean this. And here's a word that I know you've heard a whole bunch. And in Hebrew, it is spelled and pronounced like this. Ma, zal, mazal, mazal. Yeah, like mazel tov. So mazel tov is the Ashkenazic pronunciation. And notice we're shifting the accent to the beginning of the word, mazel, and swallowing up the end of it. But in Hebrew, it's mazal, tov, and tov, you know, already means good. Tov with a tet means good. Mazal tov, the adjective always follows the noun. Mazal tov is good luck or good fortune. If you want to know your astrology sign, you ask, what's your mazal? What's your fortune-ish? I don't know. I remember the first time I learned anything about Ladino. So Yiddish is a combination of German and Hebrew. And then it's picked up a lot of other things along the way, so you get Polish and you get Russian and things like that. But its core is German combined with some Hebrew. Ladino is a similar kind of a thing. It's a dialect which is actually a language. It was spoken by many people. There are some people that are born still speaking Ladino, but not as many. And Ladino is Spanish and Hebrew. So one of the first concert of Ladino music I had ever gone to, I think I was 18-ish, they talked about a song that was, instead of Mazel Tov, they talked about Mazal Bueno and Mazal Perro, which is the good Mazal and the dog Mazal. I like that. Mazal Bueno and Mazal Perro. That's one of the few phrases in Ladino that I know at all. I know some good Ladino music. I know melodies, Ladino melodies to a lot of songs, but I don't know a lot of Ladino words. There is a woman in Shreveport now whose native language was Ladino, and she promises she's going to teach us some Ladino one of these days soon. So I'm looking forward to that. So then we've got this one. We've got the gap at the bottom, Gimel. And so one word is gam. Gam means also. Gam. And then another word is, this is one of my favorite words to write. And it's more fun to write it in cursive than it is in block, but you'll notice that all three of these letters are narrow letters. And the word is zug. A zug is a couple, like two people or something. So I'll show you why I love writing it in cursive. Because in cursive, this is a zayin, this is the vav, and this is the gimel. And so if I were to take that, and even in my wonderful designs here, I get, I could make a couple with a girl and a guy or something like that, little sideburns or something, but I like turning a zug into a couple. And it's how I remember which one goes in which direction when I'm writing the letters in cursive, because the zug goes this way and the g goes this way for zug. Anyway, that's fun. Something that I didn't do with you was teach you all the letters in the cursive too. Online, I do that at the same time, and I didn't do it with this group. Then this one is a word that is in the text, and the word is tignov. tignov. So the tav at the beginning means you will do it. And the gimel nun vet means steal. So tignov is you will steal. And obviously there's a lo in front of this one too. It's one of the two-word ones. You take that out. Lo tignov means you will not steal. Not that you will steal, but lo tignov, you will not steal. In Yiddish, you may have heard an expression that if someone is a thief, they call him a ganef. A ganef is a thief. And they get it from the word ganav. So they changed the v into a f to make it easier to say, ganef. But ganav means he stole. Lignov, that's the root for stealing. So they say, oh, he was a ganef. He took everything. And then we get to our last letter to practice. Well, the last letter that we're learning, and then you know all the letters. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to start at the left on this. This is an ayin with an o and a final fe. What's that? It's a chicken. Oaf. So there's a great joke I know. There was a member of Knesset that they used to pick on all the time, and they would tell David Levy jokes. And so David Levy would do silly things like he went to buy a car, and he goes to try to put the key in the car, and it doesn't go in. He says, it's not going in. And they said, Shinayim lamala, which means teeth up. And he couldn't get it to work. So those are the kind of silly jokes that they told about him. But my favorite one had to do with the oaf, that he went to a department store, and he went specifically to buy, they had a good sale, on a tanur oaf, which means an oaf cooking thing. It was an oaf oven. Made chicken. It was specialized for making chicken. So he buys this tanur oaf, he buys an oaf, and he brings it home. And the next day he brings it back and he said, I don't understand, this thing doesn't work. And they said, what do you mean it doesn't work? He said, well, it's supposed to cook oaf, right? And they said, yeah. And he said, well, I put the oaf inside the tanur, inside the oven, and I would turn it to oaf, and it wouldn't cook. I love that one. All right. So then, related to that one a little bit, is this one. This is an aleph, a silent aleph with an ah, and the final fe. It's not off, it's off. Off. So you can say, well, that joke was just awful. So off means nose. I kind of missed it, not on the nose on that one. Well, yeah, because the expression about the expression about anger, like anytime God gets mad, it's always about what's happening to his nose. I guess it's kind of the nose flare thing going on, and you know that God was angry, and it has to do with off, which is good. It's awful when you get angry. And then, appropriate, it should have been the last one on the page. Circular samech with an O, and the final fe is sof, which means end. If I say hasof, that means the end. That's the end of our alphabet. Hasof, you now know every single letter and every vowel and every possible sound. And Hebrew is a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. So you can sound out anything that we put in front of you. Even this huge page of the Decalogue, you can sound it all out, especially at this stage, especially with the vowels. If the vowels are there, you can sound out anything at all. You know that even first graders in Israel learn how to read without the vowels as well. They have to learn some of it with the vowels. Sometimes poetry is written with vowels. Prayer books, Torah has vowels. Newspapers don't have vowels. Cereal boxes don't have vowels. The only time that you might see vowels in a newspaper are things like, let's say it's the name of a politician from another country and you're not used to seeing that name. Eventually, when you know that it's President Bush and all you're seeing is something like this, you don't know if it's Bush or Bosch or, you don't know exactly what it is, but eventually when you say president and that, then you know. You don't have to worry about putting the vowels in. Eventually you'll know. So, and we've got to be able to spell anything that we can sound out in Hebrew. So I'm going to teach you. Well, so Obama without the vowels, he's got mostly vowels in his name, doesn't he? But it would have to be with an aleph, O, ba, ma. Then you take out the vowels, and everybody's going to recognize it. But I'm going to show you a few things that are, now that we learned the whole alphabet, I'm going to show you a few things that are beyond the alphabet. Because we have to be able to make any sound that exists, especially if it's in another language. And there are some sounds, I can show you how to make sounds, like if you want to do or something like that. How do you write that in Hebrew? You got to be able to write it in Hebrew. It's kind of awkward. In the language that the Torah was written in, that God created the world with, to be able to do sounds like that. But I have a textbook that we use a lot, it's my primary biblical Hebrew textbook that I use now. And they have one story, they have stories about, it's kind of like Jack and Jill stories. And there's one where one of them ate all of the lechem, all of the bread. Lechem was our vocabulary word. And one of them ate all of the lechem. And the other one said, you weren't supposed to eat all the lechem, you were supposed to save son, and now dad's going to be mad. And he says, and so the one who ate it says this. And you see just this. You say, and then the next thing you see is some sound with a lot of letters repeating themselves that's supposed to mean he threw up. And so it's very not good in a biblical text. It's kind of like, seriously, why are we doing this? But that's okay. I still love the book, and I still make people read that one. But there are sounds that you may have to say that I can teach you now because of the letters that we learned today. So for example, if you want to go and you want to buy jeans, you may have noticed that there's no j in any of this. But if your name is Jana, which I don't go by the name Jana, in Israel I go by the name Yosefa, but if your name is Jana or you want to buy jeans or something like that, then you make the official way of making a j now is you take a gimel and you put a chupchik on it. That's a j. A j. It does. And there's a historical reason why that makes sense. There are 6 letters which we call, and you're not going to have to remember this, we will talk about this again in another class, but the beged, whoops, I left out letters. Beged kefet. We call them that because that's the 6 letters, beged kefet. These 6 letters, when they come at the beginning of a word or syllable, they will take a dagesh, the dot in the middle of it. And 3 of them you've already seen because it changes the sound. So this without a dot is a v, we'll put it here, and with a dot it's a b. And this without a dot we learned today is a ch, and with a dot it's a k. And this without a dot it's a f, and with a dot it's a p. So those 3 still change. I told you that in Ashkenazic pronunciation, this one without a dot is a s, and with a dot it's a t. In some dialects, you'll see that without a dot, it's a th, and that's why you can get places like Bethlehem, because it's really Bet Lechem in modern pronunciation, but it's a tav without a dagesh. The gimel without a dot would be, used to be a j, and with a dot, it was a g. So you can see a kind of a similar. You'll notice that the dot versions are all hard sounds. In fact, they're called plosives. I like that. You've heard of exploding and imploding. They just plode. Cool, right? So the plosives are the kind, they're like this. They make this kind of sound to start a syllable. It's a cool thing. I'll tell you a story about that in a second. But the last one, can you guess what the difference is between the d, which is what you used to get with a dagesh? Now that's what we say for either one. But could you guess what it would be without the dagesh before? D. What other sound do you think we might have needed? It was a a voice th sound, the. So this was b with the dagesh, it was b, g, d, k, p, t. Without the dagesh, it was v, j, the, ch, f, s, or th. But now it's only these 3 letters, the b, the k, the p, that change with the dagesh. The others always stay the same. So, just showing you that there was history, and they call those beged kefet. And that's why you'll often see them, like when I wrote Tirtzach, I knew that the tav at the beginning of the word had to have a dagesh in it. and then it gets popped out, but it didn't change the pronunciation, because in modern Hebrew it doesn't change the pronunciation. But you'll see a lot of letters with dagesh, not just those six. Those six at the beginning. Oh, I was going to tell you my cool story. This is a cello story. That's why I'm glad I'm telling this, because he's our resident cellist. There was on public television once, I saw this really good, it was an interesting TV show, an interesting show about sound. And they were showing you on an oscilloscope that if you have a note, the note will go like this, okay? So let's say that wave is an ah or something like that. So what they did was they took a piano and they played A, let's say. A, I don't know, can you do it? I'm not perfect pitch. A, okay. And they recorded it and they showed it to you and it looked like this. And then if you play it on a cello, it was the exact same height above and below. It was the same exact thing. But what they did then is that, and now it's almost easier to do, you could do it on your phone practically, but then they had to like take a tape and snip. And so they took a piano, bum, and you got that. And then they took a cello, bum, and you got that. If you close your eyes, you'd be able to tell the difference between a cello and a piano easy, right? Or a trumpet and a piano. It's easy. It's not hard to do. They snipped off the very, very front, what's called the attack, the very beginning of the sound. You could not tell the difference whatsoever with what's left over. It didn't matter what instrument you picked, you chop off the attack and it's all exactly the same. That was cool. And I know that it has nothing to do specifically with your plosive thing, but that's what it reminds me of, is that the beginning is sometimes what's really important. And you'll find that Hebrew tends to have a very specific kind of flow to it, so that when you have an open sound, you don't ever have a plosive right afterwards. You'll take away the plosive and things like that. So, all right, we've got the je, and we've got, what if you were French and your name was Jean instead of John? So you take a zigzag zayin and you put and you get what they write as a je. You take, if I wanted to go and have some French fries, which they call chips, I take a tsari with a chupchik, if I want to be able to say chupchik at all. That's a ch, a real ch. Not a ch. That's one of the problems. It's a ch. It's a real ch. It's for chips. It's not chips. It's for ch for chips. So if you want jeans or je, I had a friend from Morocco named Jean, then that's how you get those things. And that's kind of beyond the aleph bet, that kind of don't exist. And that's the whole thing. That's all of your letters, all of your sounds, all of your letters. And so we have to figure out what we're going to do from here. Maybe conversational. Usually I go off into a different direction, like conversational or prayer or biblical. So we'll talk about that. But thank you. Turning off the sound.